Tonight, we will tell you a story about a time when light and warmth were a profound skill, far from a simple switch. A story of how, for centuries, before the invention of the match, humanity mastered the element of fire. You will learn about the simple yet essential tools used, the flint and the steel, the tinder box and its secrets. You will discover the delicate art of coaxing a spark into a flame and the vigorous effort required for friction methods like the bow drill. We will explore how fire was a fundamental necessity, the very heart of medieval life, providing warmth, light, safety, and the means for daily survival. This is a story of ingenuity, patience, and the deep human need to conquer the darkness. Oh, and if you enjoy these stories, remember that new sleep stories are released here every day. You can also suggest topics for future tales in the comments below and subscribe to the channel to ensure you do not miss any. All right, find a comfortable spot, settle in, and let your mind drift as we journey back to a world where every flicker of light was a testament to human skill. We will begin by imagining a world plunged into darkness and cold, a world where the very act of living depended on a single vital spark. Tonight, we journey back to a time before electric lights illuminated our nights, before central heating warmed our homes, and long before a simple match could conjure a flame with a flick of the wrist. We will explore a world where fire was not merely a convenience, an optional comfort, but the very essence of survival itself, a constant vital companion in the face of profound, all-encompassing darkness and the relentless, biting cold. Imagine, if you will, the Middle Ages, a vast historical period stretching roughly from the 5th to the 15th century, when the sun, the only true source of widespread illumination, dipped below the horizon. True darkness descended upon the land. This was not the mitigated darkness we know today, softened by distant city glows or the faint light from a neighbor's window. This was a thick, absolute blackness, a profound void that most of us in the modern world have never truly experienced. There were no streetlights to guide your path, no illuminated shop windows to break the gloom, and certainly no glowing screens to cast light into the corners of a room. A moonless night could render the world utterly invisible, transforming familiar pathways into treacherous obstacles and turning even the shortest journey into a perilous undertaking. Within the confines of one's own home, shadows danced with every flicker of a candle, a resin torch, or a dying ember in the hearth. This profound darkness was not just an absence of light. It was a heavy psychological weight, an oppressive presence where dangers, both real and imagined, could lurk unseen. The primal fear of the unknown was amplified exponentially by the inability to perceive it. Life, in many ways, was dictated entirely by the rhythm of the sun, and the coming of night signaled a universal retreat, a drawing inward to whatever small, precious pockets of light could be painstakingly created. Activities that required sight, from reading and writing to detailed crafting, ceased abruptly at dusk. The world quieted, and the sounds of the night, previously masked by daytime bustle, became starkly apparent. Then consider the cold, a constant, pervasive enemy. Medieval dwellings, whether a humble peasant's wattle and daub hut, a sturdy timber-frame farmhouse, or a lord's imposing stone castle, were uniformly drafty, poorly insulated, and utterly devoid of anything resembling modern heating systems. Stone walls, while providing robust defense, retained the bitter cold, radiating chill into the interior. Wooden structures, though warmer than stone, offered little barrier against biting winds and penetrating dampness. Winters were long, often brutally harsh, and without a reliable, continuous source of heat, mere existence was precarious. Hypothermia was not an abstract medical term. It was a very real, ever-present threat, particularly for the elderly, the very young, and anyone engaged in outdoor labor for extended periods. Frostbite was common, and illnesses like pneumonia, exacerbated by damp and cold, claimed countless lives. Fire, therefore, was the sole, indispensable defense against this relentless chill, transforming a frigid, damp interior into a habitable, life-sustaining space. The hearth, the central fireplace or fire pit within a home, was far more than just an architectural feature. It was the pulsating vital heart of the entire household, a source of warmth that drew families, servants, and even transient travelers together around its comforting, life-giving glow. It was the place where stories were shared, where plans were made, and where the sense of community was forged in the face of external hardship. Beyond warmth and light, fire was absolutely indispensable for the most fundamental aspect of daily life, the preparation of food. In an era without refrigeration, cooking was not merely about enhancing flavor or creating culinary delights. It was fundamentally about preservation, safety, and digestibility. Meat, fish, and dairy products had to be cooked thoroughly to prevent rapid spoilage and the onset of illness. Grains, the backbone of the medieval diet, were routinely baked into bread, a staple food consumed by virtually everyone. Soups and stews, simmering for hours over an open flame, provided nourishing, easily digestible sustenance and helped to warm bodies from the inside out. Boiling water, though the science of germ theory was unknown, was a common and effective practice for brewing ale and beer, which were often safer to drink than untreated water, or for preparing medicinal concoctions. Every single meal, from the simplest humble porridge consumed by a serf to the grandest multi-course feast served in a noble's great hall, depended entirely and unequivocally on the ability to generate and meticulously maintain a consistent fire. Furthermore, fire served as a critical tool for essential protection. Its flickering light, even in small measure, deterred wild animals that roamed freely in the forests and fields surrounding settlements, keeping them at bay from homes, barns, and precious livestock. The smoke, too, particularly from wood fires, could act as an effective deterrent against bothersome and disease-carrying insects. For those traveling across vast, untamed landscapes, a campfire offered a vital beacon of safety, a visible sign of human presence, and a crucial psychological barrier against the vast, unknown wilderness and its myriad threats, both real and imagined. In a more symbolic sense, the very presence of a controlled fire represented order, civilization, and human dominion against the untamed chaos of the natural world. It was a constant reminder of human ingenuity and resilience. The pervasive reach of fire extended far beyond the domestic sphere, permeating virtually every craft, trade, and industry of the age, forming the very backbone of the medieval economy and its technological capabilities. Blacksmiths, essential figures in any community, relied on roaring, intensely hot furnaces to heat and shape raw iron into indispensable tools for farming and building. formidable weapons for defense, and protective armor for knights. Potters fired clay in carefully constructed kilns, transforming soft, pliable earth into durable, waterproof vessels for storage, cooking, and transport. Glass blowers, with their specialized skills, manipulated molten glass using intense heat to create delicate windows for cathedrals and homes, and practical bottles for liquids. Brewers needed large, steady fires to heat their massive vats for the complex fermentation process of ale and beer, vital beverages in daily life. Dyers utilized heat to prepare their dyes and to set vibrant colors into fabrics, creating the clothing and tapestries of the era. Even the very construction of buildings often involved fire. Wood was charred to improve its resistance to decay, and limestone was heated in immense lime kilns to produce quicklime, a crucial component of mortar for masonry. From the production of charcoal for fuel to the smelting of ores, from baking bricks to rendering fat for candles and soap, the entire medieval infrastructure and its advancements would simply grind to a halt without the ubiquitous presence and mastery of fire. Thus, the ability to not only make but also to meticulously control fire was not a niche skill reserved for specialists. It was a universal fundamental necessity, a core competency for every single household and every community. It was a skill passed down diligently through generations, learned practically from early childhood, a silent, unspoken language of survival, etched into the very fabric of daily existence. The methods for ignition were often arduous, requiring immense patience, considerable practice, and a deep, intuitive understanding of natural materials and their properties. There were no matches, no convenient lighters, no instant ignition buttons. Each and every flame was a hard-won triumph of human ingenuity and perseverance over the harsh, demanding realities of a world that demanded constant vigilance against the cold, the dark, and the ever-present threat of hunger. This profound, inescapable reliance on fire-shaped daily routines influenced architectural design and fostered a deep, almost reverential respect for the power, the preciousness, and the fleeting nature of a simple, flickering flame. It was a world where every single morning brought the renewed challenge of coaxing warmth and precious light into existence, a testament to the enduring human spirit in the face of nature's relentless and often unforgiving demands. Having established the foundational need for fire, let us now turn our attention to the primary method by which it was conjured in the Middle Ages, the ingenious combination of flint and steel. This was not merely a convenient trick, it was a fundamental technology, a daily ritual performed in countless homes, workshops, and encampments across the European landscape. You would find these humble yet indispensable tools in the pockets of solitary travelers navigating lonely roads, carefully tucked away beside the hearths of bustling peasant homes, and carried by hardened soldiers on long, arduous campaigns. Their deceptive simplicity belied their profound importance, for they represented the most reliable pathway from cold darkness to warmth and light, a critical link in the chain of daily survival. The first essential component was the steel striker, often simply called a fire steel. This was typically a small, specially crafted piece of high-carbon steel, frequently shaped like a C, an oval, or even a simple rectangular bar with a loop for a finger. Its design was not arbitrary. The curve or specific form allowed for a firm, comfortable grip, enabling the user to deliver a precise, glancing blow against the other element. This steel was meticulously forged, often by a local blacksmith who possessed a deep understanding of the specific metallurgical properties required for this particular tool. It needed to possess an ideal balance of extreme hardness and resilience. If the steel were too soft, the flint would simply scrape away at it, producing only dull, cold filings instead of brilliant, hot sparks. If it were too brittle, it would fracture and break under the repeated impact, rendering it utterly useless. When you held such a striker, you would feel its solid, almost heavy weight, a tangible testament to the skill of its maker and its enduring purpose. It was not a disposable item, but a durable tool, carefully preserved, often passed down through generations, acquiring a smooth, dark, worn patina from countless strikes and years of diligent use. Its edges, though not honed to a blade's sharpness, were nonetheless crucial and needed to be kept relatively crisp, for they were the vital point of contact for generating the essential sparks. Its counterpart was a piece of flint. Flint is a naturally occurring hard sedimentary cryptocrystalline form of the mineral quartz. It forms in chalk or limestone deposits, and in the Middle Ages it was readily available in many regions, often found as irregular nodules or smooth pebbles in riverbeds or exposed cliffs. What made flint uniquely suited for fire starting was its remarkable hardness, which rivals that of steel, and its distinct ability to fracture with what is known as a conchoidal break. This type of fracture produces extremely sharp shell-like edges, often with a razor-thin profile. These edges were crucial. They were not merely sharp in the way a freshly ground knife edge is. They possessed microscopic serrations and irregularities, almost like tiny invisible teeth designed for effective scraping. When you held a piece of good flint, you would notice its smooth, almost waxy feel on one side, perhaps a dull, chalky exterior, and then the incredibly sharp, almost glass-like edges where it had been intentionally broken or naturally fractured. Its color could vary widely, from a pale gray to deep brown or even black, but a freshly broken surface would often reveal a deeper, often translucent gray, brown, or even a blue-black hue. The careful selection of the right flint was paramount. It needed to be free of internal cracks or weak spots that would cause it to crumble, and it needed to present a sharp, stable edge for consistent striking. The interaction between these two seemingly inert materials was nothing short of a small miracle, a dance of precise physics and rapid chemistry that culminated in the birth of an ember. To generate a spark, the user would hold the piece of flint firmly and securely in one hand, positioning one of its sharp, stable edges outward, typically directly over the intended tinder. Then, with the other hand, they would grip the steel striker and deliver a swift, decisive downward motion against this sharp flint edge. This was not a direct, head-on impact, which would be ineffective. Rather, it was a specific, glancing blow, a scraping motion designed to abrade and shear off minute particles of the steel. As the unyielding, sharp edge of the flint scraped forcefully against the relatively softer, yet still very hard, steel, tiny, almost imperceptible fragments of the high-carbon steel were shaved off. The friction generated by this concentrated, rapid scraping was incredibly intense, focused entirely on these minuscule detached particles. This intense localized friction instantly heated these tiny steel fragments to extremely high temperatures, well above their ignition point, often reaching temperatures of several hundred degrees Celsius in a fraction of a second. As these superheated particles were abraded and separated from the main body of the steel, they were immediately exposed to the oxygen in the surrounding air. This rapid exposure to oxygen caused them to undergo immediate, vigorous oxidation, effectively burning brightly as they flew through the air. These incandescent burning specks of iron oxide are what we perceive as sparks. When you observe this process in a dimly lit room or at dusk, you would see a tiny, brilliant shower of these glowing fragments, each one a miniature star, arcing briefly through the air. The faint, acrid metallic scent of the strike, a fleeting reminder of the chemical transformation taking place, might also be subtly discernible in the air. It is important to understand that these were not just any sparks. They were hot, molten metal, burning fiercely as they traveled. They would fly off in a precise shower, each one a glowing miniature ember carrying enough residual heat to ignite a properly prepared fuel. The trick, then, was not merely to create sparks, but to direct them with absolute precision onto a material that was eager to catch fire. This method, while seemingly simple in concept, required significant practice, patience, and a certain innate knack to master. The specific angle of the strike, the precise force applied, and the inherent quality of both the steel and the flint all played a critical part in determining the success of the endeavor. It was a testament to the ingenuity and practical understanding of the medieval mind that they harnessed this precise physical interaction, this small, controlled explosion of iron and air, transforming dead stone and cold metal into the promise of warmth and life. This mastery of flint and steel was not just a practical skill to be learned and practiced. It was a daily necessity, an ingrained part of life, representing a quiet yet profound act of defiance against the ever-present cold and pervasive darkness that so thoroughly defined much of the medieval world, a testament to human ingenuity in the face of nature's indifference. You had your steel striker, a strong curved piece of metal, and a sharp-edged piece of flintstone. You also possessed the crucial knowledge of how to make them collide just so, producing a glorious shower of bright, fleeting sparks. But sparks alone, no matter how brilliant or numerous, were not enough to ignite a fire. Imagine a world plunged into the profound darkness of a moonless night, the chilling dampness of a persistent winter rain seeping into every bone, or the sharp bite of an early morning frost. In such a world, a spark, no matter how intensely it burned for that fraction of a second, would simply wink out into the void, leaving behind only the memory of its brief existence. It needed a home, a willing, prepared material ready to catch its brief, fierce heat and transform that momentary flash into a persistent, living glow. This is precisely where the tinderbox became not merely a convenience, but an object of absolute, undeniable necessity. It was, in many ways, the very heart of fire-making, a small, often unassuming container, holding within its simple confines the profound promise of warmth, of light, of cooked food, and of life itself. The tinderbox itself was typically a humble yet robust container. It could be crafted from wood, perhaps a carefully carved piece of oak or pine, or fashioned from durable metal such as tin or iron. Its primary design purpose was singular and vital: to keep its precious, highly flammable contents meticulously dry and utterly protected from the pervasive dampness and the unpredictable elements of the medieval world. Inside this guarded vessel, you would find a carefully curated collection of materials collectively known as tinder. Tinder was any substance specifically chosen and prepared for its ability to ignite with remarkable ease from even the tiniest, most elusive spark, and then, crucially, to smolder steadily, holding a fragile ember long enough for it to be gently nurtured and coaxed into a vigorous, self-sustaining flame. The selection of the right tinder was not a matter of chance. It was a critical choice, and its meticulous preparation was an intricate art, a practical wisdom patiently passed down through the quiet teachings of generations. Perhaps the most highly valued and consistently effective form of tinder was char cloth. This was far more than just a random scrap of fabric. It was, in essence, fabric, most commonly made from natural fibers like soft, absorbent cotton or strong, durable linen that had been meticulously carbonized through a precise and controlled process of burning. To create this invaluable char cloth, one would carefully cut small, manageable pieces of the chosen fabric. These pieces were then placed inside a tightly sealed metal tin or container, perhaps an old discarded snuff box, or a small repurposed iron can that could withstand the heat. A tiny, almost imperceptible hole was often deliberately pierced in the lid of this container. This tiny aperture served a critical function. It allowed the gases produced during the charring process to slowly and safely escape, preventing the tin from bursting while simultaneously ensuring the fabric did not burst into open flame due to lack of oxygen. This tin, with its carefully placed fabric, would then be carefully positioned within a roaring hearth fire, or nestled directly onto a bed of hot, glowing embers. As the fabric within the sealed environment heated intensely, it would slowly and methodically carbonize, transforming gradually into a deep, velvety black without ever truly igniting into an open, destructive flame. From the tiny hole in the lid, a small, telltale plume of acrid smoke would often emerge, sometimes even accompanied by a tiny, flickering flame as the escaping gases themselves combusted. Once this telltale smoke finally ceased, indicating the carbonization process was complete, the tin would be carefully removed from the fire and allowed to cool completely, remaining sealed throughout this cooling period to prevent the newly formed char cloth from inadvertently igniting from contact with the open air. When, at last, you cautiously opened the tin, you would discover brittle, intensely black pieces of char cloth, remarkably light and resembling a very thin, delicate form of charcoal. This meticulously prepared char cloth possessed an incredibly low ignition temperature, meaning it could catch even the faintest, most fleeting spark and immediately begin to smolder, blossoming into a tiny, intensely red glow, much like a miniature living coal. Its reliability was legendary, making it an extraordinarily prized possession for anyone who depended on the swift and consistent ignition of fire. Beyond the meticulously crafted char cloth, people in the Middle Ages also skillfully utilized a variety of natural materials readily found within their immediate environment. Dried moss was a particularly common and accessible choice, especially certain species that naturally grew in fine, delicate, and highly fibrous strands. However, the absolute prerequisite for its effectiveness was that it had to be utterly, thoroughly, and uncompromisingly dry. Even the slightest, most lingering hint of moisture, a mere whisper of dampness, would render it entirely useless, preventing it from ever catching or holding a spark. Consequently, people would diligently gather suitable moss and then painstakingly dry it. This drying process might involve carefully spreading it out near the comforting warmth of a hearth fire or leaving it exposed to the sun's gentle heat in a warm, airy, and sun-drenched place for several days, sometimes even weeks, until it became remarkably brittle, almost dusty, and crackled faintly to the touch. The singular goal of this meticulous drying was to meticulously remove every single trace of water, leaving behind only the purest, most combustible, and absorbent plant fibers. Another exceptionally effective natural tinder was derived from certain types of fungi, most notably the tinder fungus, scientifically known as Fomes fomentarius, but more commonly referred to as amadou. This distinctive, large, and often hoof-shaped fungus typically grew firmly attached to the bark of various trees, such as the elegant birch or the sturdy beech. Preparing amadou for use as tinder was a considerably more intricate and time-consuming process than simply drying moss. First, the tough protective outer crust of the fungus would be carefully removed. Then, the soft, spongy, and highly fibrous inner layer, the true heart of the amadou, would be painstakingly extracted. This vital inner material would then undergo a lengthy boiling process, often submerged in water for several hours, with practitioners sometimes adding wood ash or even saltpeter to the boiling liquid. This boiling served a crucial purpose. It helped to break down the fungus's natural inhibitors, chemical compounds that might otherwise resist ignition, thereby making the material far more receptive and eager to catch sparks. After the prolonged boiling, the softened amadou would be removed and vigorously pounded flat with a heavy hammer or a stout mallet. This pounding was not merely for shaping. It further softened and significantly expanded its fibers, increasing its surface area and porosity, making it even more efficient at capturing the fleeting heat of a spark. Finally, and perhaps most critically, it would be painstakingly dried, a process that could span many weeks, until it was completely desiccant, utterly devoid of moisture, and possessed a unique, leathery, almost velvety texture that was unmistakable to the touch. When prepared with such care and precision, amadou was an outstanding tinder, possessing the remarkable ability to not only catch a spark, but to hold and sustain a delicate ember for a significant duration, often several minutes, rendering it an invaluable resource for fire starting, particularly in challenging, damp, or adverse environmental conditions where other tinder might fail. The rigorous and precise preparation of these diverse tinder materials was undeniably paramount. Whether it involved the precise charring of fabric in a sealed tin, the patient, sun-drenched drying of delicate mosses, or the intricate multi-stage process of boiling and pounding resilient fungi, the fundamental objective remained unalterably the same: to create a material that was supremely dry, exceptionally porous, and possessed an admirably low ignition point. The tinder was not merely a passive recipient. It needed to be an active, willing participant in the chemical reaction, a material eagerly poised to absorb the spark's intense, concentrated energy, transforming it from a fleeting, almost invisible flash into a steady, reliable, and utterly controllable ember. Without this meticulously prepared tinder, the arduous and skillful striking of flint against steel, no matter how expertly executed, would be a frustrating and ultimately futile exercise, yielding nothing but ephemeral flashes in the dark. The tinderbox, therefore, was far more than a simple utilitarian container. It was a carefully curated collection of latent potential, a portable, tangible promise of warmth, of illuminating light, of the ability to cook and purify, and of fundamental sustenance in a world where the presence of fire was never a mere luxury, but the very bedrock of daily survival. Every weary traveler, every bustling medieval household, every dedicated artisan from the blacksmith to the baker, understood with an innate, practical wisdom that the carefully guarded contents of their tinderbox were as profoundly vital as their most essential tools, their most precious coins, or their very food supply. It stood as a silent, enduring testament to the deep ingenuity, the painstaking foresight, and the remarkable resourcefulness that was not just desired, but absolutely required to merely survive, let alone truly to thrive, in a distant era before the almost magical, effortless flick of a modern match. You had your tinderbox ready with its precious contents, the carefully charred linen, the dried fungus, or the finely shredded bark. This was the foundation, the very heart of your upcoming flame, the material that, with careful attention, would transform a mere spark into a nascent ember. Now came the moment of action, the precise dance of flint and steel that would coax forth the first glimmer of warmth. This was where skill and patience truly intertwined, for it was not enough to simply strike two materials together. One had to understand the very nature of the spark itself and how to capture its fleeting energy. To begin this essential process, you would typically hold the piece of flint firmly. Flint was a common, naturally occurring stone often found in chalk beds or gravel deposits. It was chosen for its hardness and its conchoidal fracture, meaning it broke with sharp, shell-like edges. You would select a piece that fit comfortably in your hand, perhaps a dark, unyielding stone with a sharp, clean edge, or one that had been deliberately flaked to create such a striking surface. This hand, holding the flint, would be positioned directly over the waiting tinder. This tinder, whether a small, carefully placed nest of char cloth, a delicate wisp of dried moss, or a finely prepared piece of amadou fungus, would be laid out within the tinderbox itself, or perhaps on a dry, flat surface such as a wooden board or a piece of leather, ensuring no moisture could dampen its potential. The flint's edge, that critical point of contact, would be angled slightly downward, presenting a clear, sharp surface to receive the blow. The precision of this initial setup was paramount. Every millimeter mattered when trying to capture something as ephemeral as a spark. In your other hand, you would grasp the steel striker. This was not just any piece of metal, but a specially hardened piece of high-carbon steel, forged by a smith who understood its purpose. Often, it was shaped like a letter C or a simple curved bar, designed to be held comfortably and struck effectively, allowing for a firm grip and a controlled swing. The quality of this steel was crucial, for a poor striker would yield few, if any, useful sparks. The strike itself was not a gentle tap, but a swift, forceful, glancing blow. You would bring the steel down against the sharp edge of the flint, not trying to chip or break the flint, but rather to shave off tiny, almost invisible particles of the steel itself. The motion was usually a downward scraping action, designed to maximize the friction and heat generated at the point of impact. The magic of this interaction lay in the rapid friction and the unique properties of the materials. When the exceptionally hard flint scraped with considerable force against the softer, yet tough, high-carbon steel, it would shave off microscopic slivers of metal. The intense force of the impact and the sudden concentrated friction would heat these tiny steel particles to an extreme temperature within milliseconds. This rapid heating caused them to instantly ignite upon contact with the oxygen in the air, undergoing a process of rapid oxidation and glowing with an intense, bright, orange-red heat. This is what created the shower of brilliant incandescent sparks that would leap from the point of impact. They were not merely light, they were miniature fragments of burning metal, each one a fleeting fiery promise, carrying enough heat to ignite the right fuel. Your gaze would be fixed intently on the tinder, your concentration absolute, blocking out all other distractions. The goal was to direct these precious sparks, these fleeting moments of intense focused heat, precisely onto the prepared, highly combustible material. A skilled hand would know exactly how to angle the flint and the steel, adjusting the striking motion to send the maximum number of sparks cascading down onto the char cloth or dried fungus. You might even hear a sharp, distinct metallic click as the steel connected with the flint, a sound that quickly became synonymous with the hope of fire, a small but significant herald of the warmth to come. It was a delicate process, demanding both controlled strength in the strike and a light, steady touch in positioning. Sometimes, with a stroke of luck or exceptional skill, a single, well-aimed strike would be enough, sending a concentrated cascade of sparks that found their mark immediately, igniting a tiny point on the tinder. More often, especially if the flint was dull, the steel worn, or the tinder not perfectly prepared, it required repeated efforts. Strike after strike, the steel would clink against the flint, producing burst after burst of sparks, each one a fresh chance to ignite the waiting tinder. The air might fill with the faint, sharp, acrid scent of burning steel, a subtle hint of the energy being released, a smell that spoke of the effort and the potential. You would watch, perhaps holding your breath, for that one spark, that single glowing speck, to land squarely on the prepared char cloth and begin to smolder. This smoldering was not yet a flame, but it was the vital first step, the successful birth of an ember, a tiny glowing heart of heat, that held within it the entire potential for warmth, light, and ultimately, survival. It was a moment of quiet triumph. When that tiny point of light appeared, a faint orange glow against the dark tinder, a sign that your efforts were about to bear fruit. The next challenge, then, was to transform that fragile, nascent ember into a sustained, living flame, a process that demanded further skill and gentle care. The successful creation of that ember was the true mark of a firemaker's ability, a skill honed through countless repetitions, sometimes in the chilling grip of winter, sometimes under the pressing demands of a hungry family, always with the understanding that this small act of creation stood between comfort and hardship, between life and a chilling struggle against the elements. Every household, every traveler, every craftsman relied on this fundamental knowledge. The small tinderbox, carefully guarded, was a treasure beyond measure, for it held the promise of transformation, the potential to conquer the darkness and the cold, to cook a meal, to forge metal, to illuminate a scholar's text, or simply to provide a comforting glow in the long, silent hours of a medieval night. This seemingly simple action, the striking of flint and steel, was a profound daily ritual, connecting generations through the shared need for the most ancient and vital of human discoveries. It was a silent testament to human ingenuity, a fundamental interaction with the raw materials of the earth, turning stone and metal into a fleeting yet powerful imitation of the sun itself. The sound of the strike, the sight of the sparks, the faint smell of burning steel, these were the sensory anchors of a daily struggle, transformed by skill into a moment of pure, practical magic. The success of this stage meant moving closer to the heart of fire, from inert materials to a living, breathing warmth. Once those fleeting sparks, those tiny fragments of glowing steel, landed precisely upon the prepared tinder, the true artistry of fire-making began. This was not a moment for haste, but for a profound, almost reverent patience, a quiet dialogue between human intent and the elemental forces of nature. If you were fortunate and your aim consistently true, one of those incandescent sparks would find purchase, igniting a microscopic point within the carefully prepared char cloth or the dried, crumbly fungi, causing it to glow with a faint yet unmistakable orange ember. This ember, though initially no larger than a pinhead, held within its quiet warmth the entire promise of light, heat, and sustenance for the cold hours to come. But it was fragile, incredibly delicate, easily extinguished by a sudden, misplaced breath, a tremor of the hand, or a stray gust of the ever-present medieval wind. It was a moment of absolute, unwavering focus, where the world outside the glowing tinder faded into complete irrelevance, a singular point of attention in the vast darkness. Your next action was critical, demanding both a steady hand and a deeply calm mind. You would gently gather the tinder, now cradling that precious nascent ember, and with utmost care transfer it into a small pre-prepared nest of even finer, drier material. This nest was itself a testament to foresight and meticulous preparation, often gathered and dried over days. It might be composed of extremely fine wood shavings, perhaps painstakingly scraped from a well-seasoned log with a sharp knife, or the soft, fluffy down from a dried cattail, or even the finely shredded bark of specific trees known for their flammability, all chosen with discerning knowledge for their exceptional combustibility. The entire singular purpose of this meticulously crafted nest was to provide the nascent ember with the absolute ideal conditions to grow, to offer it a safe, oxygen-rich environment where its internal heat could intensify and expand, drawing closer to its fiery potential. The material had to be bone dry. Even a hint of lingering moisture would render it utterly useless, turning a potential flame into a disheartening wisp of smoke that quickly died away. The subtle, dry rustle of these materials as you handled them was a familiar, hopeful sound to anyone who regularly sought to master the ancient art of fire. Then came the breath, perhaps the most delicate and undeniably crucial step of all. This was not a forceful blow which would simply overwhelm and instantly extinguish the tiny, delicate glow, scattering the precious tinder into the cold air. Instead, it was a slow, steady, and incredibly gentle exhalation, directed with unwavering precision at the very heart of the ember. You would lean down, bringing your mouth close to the tinder nest, so close you could feel the faint, growing warmth radiating from the glowing speck, and breathe softly, almost as if whispering a profound secret to the glowing heart of the future fire. With each controlled, deliberate breath, you were feeding the ember, providing it with the vital oxygen it desperately needed to intensify its heat and expand its reach within the prepared materials. Your eyes would be fixed intently on that tiny orange speck, watching with bated breath as it slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to expand, its glow deepening from a faint, hesitant shimmer to a more vibrant, spreading orange across the tinder. Often, you might see a wisp of pale, ethereal smoke, thin and ghostly, begin to curl upwards from the material. This smoke, though seemingly insignificant to the uninitiated, was a crucial and welcome sign of success, an immediate indication that the combustible material was indeed igniting, that the chemical reaction was taking hold, drawing ever closer to the very cusp of a true, sustained flame. The faint, acrid, yet strangely comforting smell of burning char or wood would begin to fill the air, a scent that was synonymous with the profound promise of warmth and safety. As the ember grew, turning from a faint glow into a more vibrant, spreading orange, and the smoke became more noticeable, thicker, and perhaps even started to curl upwards with a slight burning scent, indicating real progress. You knew you were on the absolute precipice of success, just moments away from achieving your goal. At this critical stage, you would carefully, with the utmost gentleness and foresight, introduce the smallest pieces of kindling. These were not the larger sticks or logs that would later fuel a roaring blaze, but rather exceptionally thin, bone-dry slivers of wood, perhaps meticulously shaved with a sharp knife until they were almost transparent, or tiny, brittle pieces of dried grass no thicker than a simple thread. These were placed delicately around the growing ember, forming a tiny teepee or pyramid structure, ensuring that air could still circulate freely around the glowing core, yet providing more substantial and immediate fuel for the intensifying heat to consume. The faint, almost inaudible crackle of these small pieces, as they were carefully arranged, was barely audible, but deeply significant to the experienced firemaker. The heat from the expanding ember, now fed by a steady supply of oxygen and surrounded by the fine, dry kindling, would then begin its miraculous work, initiating the visible transformation. You would often see a tiny flicker, a brief, hesitant dance of orange and red, before a true flame, perhaps no larger than a thumb, would suddenly and triumphantly burst forth. This was the moment of breakthrough, the culmination of sustained patience and precise action. That small, persistent flame, born from a mere spark and nurtured with careful breath, was now a living entity, flickering with nascent power and casting its first welcome light. Once it had established itself, confidently consuming the initial kindling with a soft, hungry crackle, you could then begin to add slightly larger pieces of dry wood, gradually building up the fire until it was a roaring source of warmth, light, and comfort, a steadfast defense against the deep chill and the encroaching dark. The entire process demanded unwavering focus, an incredibly steady hand, and a profound, intuitive understanding of the subtle interplay between heat, fuel, and oxygen. It was a skill passed down through countless generations, taught patiently from parent to child, a fundamental knowledge without which survival in the harsh, often unforgiving medieval world would have been immeasurably more difficult, if not utterly impossible. Every successful flame was not merely a source of warmth, it was a testament to human patience, precision, and the profound ingenuity of those who lived in a world where fire was not a fleeting convenience, but a daily, hard-won necessity, deeply interwoven with every single aspect of their existence. While the striking of flint against steel provided the most common and often most reliable means of conjuring fire in the medieval world, especially within the confines of a settled home or a well-equipped traveling party, there existed another, even more ancient family of techniques. These methods relied entirely on the fundamental principle of friction, a raw, demanding process that transformed strenuous physical effort into concentrated heat, and that intense heat into the precious spark of life. Imagine yourself deep within a silent forest, perhaps a lone hunter or a wearied traveler whose tinderbox had been lost. In such moments, the ability to coax fire from wood alone became not merely a convenience, but an absolute necessity for survival. It was a primal skill, one passed down through countless generations, a secret whispered from elder to youth, a tangible connection to humanity's earliest mastery over the elements. The essence of friction fire starting lay in the remarkable conversion of kinetic energy, the energy of motion, into thermal energy, or heat. When two pieces of dry wood are rubbed together with sufficient speed and unwavering pressure, the inherent resistance between their surfaces generates an astonishing amount of warmth. This was a focused, searing heat, intensely concentrated on a very minuscule point of contact. The ultimate objective was to elevate the temperature of the finely ground wood dust, produced by the continuous rubbing until it reached its auto-ignition point. This is the temperature at which these minute, combustible particles would spontaneously combust and begin to smolder. This smoldering would then manifest as a tiny, dark, glowing ember, a fragile yet potent seed of fire, holding within it the promise of warmth and light. The successful execution of any friction method hinged on several critical factors, each demanding a nuanced understanding of natural materials and a refined technique. First, the meticulous selection of wood was paramount. Not all wood was equally suitable. The most effective choices were typically those with a relatively low kindling temperature and a balanced composition of hardness and softness. Generally, one piece of wood, the fireboard or hearth, would be softer and less dense, allowing for the rapid creation of a fine, powdery dust. The other piece, the spindle or drill, would be harder and more resilient, providing the necessary friction without wearing away too quickly. Woods like cedar, aspen, willow, or cottonwood were often chosen for the fireboard. For the spindle, harder wood such as oak or hickory were preferred, though choices depended on local availability. Crucially, the wood had to be absolutely thoroughly dry. Even the slightest trace of moisture could fatally absorb the precious accumulating heat, preventing the formation of an ember. A damp piece of wood would merely char and smoke, never quite reaching the critical point of combustion. Medieval people, with their profound knowledge of the natural world, understood these vital nuances. They knew which trees offered the best materials, and they learned to identify dead, sun-baked branches or weathered roots that would serve their purpose. Secondly, and perhaps most challenging, consistent and unyielding effort was crucial. Unlike the almost instantaneous spark from flint and steel, friction fire demanded extraordinary patience, remarkable perseverance, and considerable physical exertion. It was a rhythmic, almost meditative process, requiring steady, unwavering pressure combined with unflagging speed. A momentary pause, a brief lapse in concentration, or even a slight decrease in effort could cause the painstakingly accumulated heat to dissipate rapidly, forcing the firemaker to abandon their progress and begin the arduous process anew. Imagine the deep, aching strain on the arms, the burning sensation in the muscles, the sweat trickling down the brow, all in the singular pursuit of a single elusive ember. This was not a task for the faint of heart or the easily discouraged. It was a profound test of endurance, a direct, visceral connection to the primal struggle for warmth and light that had defined humanity for countless millennia. It taught humility, demanding respect for the forces of nature and the raw power of human will. Once the hot dust, often affectionately referred to as punk or charred powder, began to visibly smolder, it would form a small, dark, yet intensely glowing coal. This was the ember, the ultimate prize, the culmination of all that arduous effort. It would then be carefully, almost reverently, nudged or transferred from the fireboard into a waiting nest of tinder. Just as with the spark meticulously caught from flint, this tinder nest needed to be exquisitely prepared, light, fluffy, and bone dry. Common choices included finely shredded bark, dried grasses, fragments of old birds' nests, or finely crushed leaves. The ember, once carefully nestled within this receptive bed, would then be gently and steadily blown upon. Each breath, slow and deliberate, would feed vital oxygen to the nascent flame, encouraging the ember to grow, to spread its warmth and light through the fibrous tinder until finally, with a soft puff of smoke, a faint, dry crackle, and an almost imperceptible shift in the air, a tiny, hopeful flame would flicker to life. This transition from smoldering dust to a dancing flame was always a moment of profound triumph, a small yet significant victory over the indifferent elements. It was a skill that embodied self-reliance, a deep understanding of natural processes, and an unwavering determination to master the very forces of nature. These friction methods, while undoubtedly more laborious and physically demanding than the comparatively swift action of flint and steel, offered a profound connection to the fundamental act of creation. They were a tangible, living link to the earliest human mastery of fire, a skill that truly laid the groundwork for survival in any environment. They taught invaluable lessons about the properties of materials, the principles of physics, and the sheer indomitable power of human will, ensuring that even without metal or stone, the warmth of fire could always be found. The general principle of friction, as we discussed, was simple to grasp but difficult to master. While the hand drill required direct and strenuous effort, among the most effective and widely used friction methods, offering a more controlled approach, was the bow drill. This ingenious device allowed a single person to generate the sustained heat necessary for fire, requiring a precise understanding of its components, coupled with coordination, strength, and unwavering patience. It was a testament to the deep practical knowledge of the medieval individual, a skill passed down through generations. To construct a functional bow drill, one needed several specific components, each meticulously chosen and playing a very vital role in the overall mechanism. First, there was the bow itself. This was typically a sturdy yet flexible stick, perhaps a foot or two in length, carefully selected for its resilience. It was then strung with a strong cord or a durable leather thong, creating a taut line much like an archer's bow. This bow, when operated, served as the primary power source, translating human motion into the rapid spinning of another key element. Next came the spindle, a crucial component often referred to as the drill stick. This was a straight, hard wooden stick, usually about 6 to 8 inches long and roughly as thick as a thumb. Its ends were carefully prepared, often sharpened or tapered slightly, with one end designed to fit securely into a handhold and the other to press firmly into the fireboard. The selection of wood for the spindle was paramount. It needed to be hard enough to withstand the immense friction without wearing down too quickly, yet possess enough internal structure to transfer the heat efficiently to the contact point. Woods like oak, ash, or maple were often favored for their durability and density. The third essential component was the fireboard, sometimes simply called the hearthboard or baseboard. This was a flat piece of softer, dry wood, carefully chosen for its ability to create friction with the harder spindle while also being receptive to ignition. Woods such as cedar, poplar, cypress, or even cottonwood were commonly used for their relative softness and low ignition temperature. On its surface, small, shallow indentations or hearths were meticulously carved. These hearths were the precise points where the tip of the spindle would rotate, grinding against the fireboard. Crucially, a small notch or V-shaped cut was often made from the edge of each hearth, extending outwards. This notch served a dual purpose. It allowed the accumulating fine wood dust, generated by the friction, to fall out and collect into a concentrated pile, and it also provided a pathway for oxygen to reach this pile, significantly aiding in its eventual ignition. This collection of dust, often called punk or charred dust, was the raw material for the ember. Finally, there was the handhold, also known as a socket or bearing block. This was a small, hard piece of wood, stone, or even bone, meticulously shaped to fit comfortably in one hand. It featured a slight hollow or depression carved into one side, designed to receive the top end of the spindle. This handhold was gripped firmly and pressed down onto the top of the spindle, providing the necessary downward pressure to ensure constant contact between the spindle and the fireboard. To minimize friction at this upper point and ensure that the maximum amount of energy was transferred to the working end of the spindle, a smooth, hard pebble or a piece of polished bone was sometimes placed within the hollow of the handhold, acting as a low-friction bearing. Once all these components were meticulously gathered and prepared, often after considerable effort in foraging and shaping, the intricate process of making fire with a bow drill could finally begin. The fire maker would typically position themselves on the ground, often kneeling, bracing the fireboard firmly with one foot to prevent any unwanted slipping or movement during the intense operation. The bowstring was then carefully looped once around the middle of the spindle, ensuring it was taut and securely wrapped. One end of the spindle was then carefully placed into one of the pre-made hearths on the fireboard. The handhold was then brought into position, placed on the top end of the spindle, and steady, controlled downward pressure was applied, ensuring constant contact. With the entire apparatus assembled and stabilized, the physical technique, demanding both rhythm and endurance, commenced. The bow was held horizontally in one hand, usually the dominant one, and drawn back and forth in a smooth, continuous, and rhythmic motion, much like the action of sawing wood. This consistent back and forth movement caused the bowstring to rapidly rotate the spindle within the hearth on the fireboard. The motion had to be unwavering, maintaining a steady and high rate of rotation. As the spindle spun, the intense friction generated between its tip and the fireboard began its transformative work, converting mechanical energy into heat. Almost immediately, fine wood dust, a direct result of the grinding action, would begin to accumulate within the notch cut from the hearth. This dust, often called punk or charred dust, was a critical element in the process. As the friction increased, the dust would gradually darken, changing from its natural wood color to a rich, deep black. A faint, yet distinct, scent of wood smoke would begin to rise from the point of contact, a clear and encouraging sign that the wood was heating rapidly, approaching its critical ignition temperature. The firemaker would continue to apply consistent pressure and maintain the rapid spinning, their gaze intently focused on the point of friction, watching for the telltale wisps of smoke to become more pronounced and persistent. The ultimate goal of this sustained effort was to generate enough heat to cause this accumulated wood dust to reach its auto-ignition temperature. As the spinning continued, the smoke would grow visibly thicker, curling upwards in a steady stream. If the conditions were just right, if the wood was sufficiently dry, the pressure consistent, and the spinning speed maintained, a small yet miraculous glowing ember would suddenly appear within the pile of blackened dust. This tiny, fragile spark, often no larger than a pea, was the tangible culmination of all the arduous effort, a tiny beacon of warmth glowing with a deep orange light, a silent testament to the concentrated energy of friction. This precious ember, still delicate and vulnerable, was then carefully transferred to a pre-prepared tinder bundle. This bundle, meticulously assembled beforehand, would consist of highly flammable, finely shredded material, such as bird's nest material, thoroughly dried moss, finely shredded bark, or even the char cloth we discussed earlier. The firemaker would then gently yet steadily blow on the ember, providing it with a continuous supply of oxygen. With each gentle puff of breath, the ember would slowly grow, its warmth spreading to the surrounding tinder until, with careful nurturing, the tinder bundle would eventually burst into a small, welcoming flame. This small flame was then ready to ignite larger pieces of kindling and, finally, the main fire, providing warmth, light, and a means for survival. The bow drill, though demanding in its execution, was a remarkably reliable method, offering a systematic and effective approach to fire starting that was invaluable in a world where matches were centuries away. It embodied the profound ingenuity and persistent effort required to harness nature's fundamental elements for the very essence of human existence. While the bow drill offered a mechanical advantage, a more primal and certainly more physically demanding friction method was the hand drill. This technique relied solely on direct human effort, transforming the raw power of your hands and arms into the heat necessary for ignition. It was a method that spoke to a profound understanding of natural materials and an unwavering determination. To perform the hand drill, you first needed two specific pieces of wood. The first was the spindle, or the drill stick. This needed to be a straight, dry piece of wood, roughly the length of your arm and about the thickness of your thumb. Ideal wood for the spindle would be a harder variety, such as oak, maple, or even certain fruit woods, which could withstand the intense friction without quickly wearing down. It was crucial that the wood was completely dry, as any moisture would absorb the heat you were trying to generate, making the task nearly impossible. The ends of this spindle would be prepared by being slightly blunted or rounded, allowing for stable contact with the fireboard and comfortable gripping by your hands. The straightness of the spindle was also paramount, ensuring that the rotational motion was consistent and efficient, without wobbling that would dissipate the energy. The second piece of wood was the fireboard, sometimes called the hearth board. This needed to be a softer, equally dry piece of wood, perhaps cedar, poplar, or a soft pine. It had to be thick enough to provide a stable base, usually an inch or more, and wide enough to brace firmly against the ground or between your feet. On this fireboard, you would carve a small, shallow indentation, a divot, where the tip of your spindle would rest. From the edge of this divot, you would then carve a small V-shaped notch that extended to the side of the fireboard. This notch was absolutely critical, as its purpose was to allow the fine, hot wood dust created by the friction to accumulate into a tiny pile outside the main point of contact. This accumulating dust, rather than the wood itself, was what would eventually ignite. Before you began the drilling process, you would prepare your tinder nest. This could be a small, loose bundle of finely shredded bark, dried grass, or the char cloth you might use with flint and steel. This nest would be placed directly beneath the V-notch of your fireboard, ready to receive the nascent ember. The preparation of the tinder was just as important as the wood selection. It needed to be incredibly dry and airy to readily catch the slightest spark and burst into flame when oxygenated. With your materials prepared, you would adopt a stable, kneeling posture. The fireboard would be firmly pressed against the ground, often held in place by your feet or knees, ensuring it would not shift during the strenuous activity. Your body would lean forward slightly, allowing you to apply consistent downward pressure onto the spindle. The spindle was then placed vertically into the divot on the fireboard. Now came the core of the hand drill technique. You would cup the spindle between your palms, applying firm, downward pressure. The initial motion would be a slow, controlled rotation, rolling the spindle rapidly back and forth between your hands. Your goal in this initial phase was to create a small amount of fine black wood dust within and around the divot. This dust would be the material that would eventually form the ember. As you continued, the motion would become more fluid, your hands moving swiftly down the length of the spindle, causing it to spin ever faster. The friction between the spindle and the fireboard would begin to generate heat, and you might notice a faint wisp of smoke, a subtle, earthy scent of warm wood. The true challenge of the hand drill lay in maintaining this rapid, consistent rotation while simultaneously applying sufficient downward pressure. As your hands inevitably slid down the spindle, you would need to perform a quick, almost acrobatic regrip. This involved quickly sliding your hands back to the top of the spindle, often by lifting one hand just enough to move it back up, then repeating with the other, all while trying to keep the spindle spinning without losing too much momentum or pressure. This required immense coordination, practice, and a degree of physical strength. The rhythm was crucial, a constant, almost rhythmic back and forth motion, generating an ever-increasing amount of heat. As the heat intensified, the smoke would become thicker, darker, and more pungent, signaling that you were nearing the critical temperature. You would observe the wood dust accumulating in the V-notch, turning from light brown to black as it carbonized from the intense heat. You would continue this strenuous, repetitive motion, pushing through the fatigue until you saw a small, glowing coal form within the pile of black dust in the V-notch. This was the ember, a fragile, precious speck of fire. At this precise moment, you would carefully slide the fireboard away, separating the ember from the main drilling point, and gently transfer the tiny glowing coal into the waiting tinder nest. This transfer required a steady hand and a calm demeanor, as the ember was incredibly delicate and could easily be extinguished. The final and perhaps most delicate step was to nurture this tiny ember into a sustainable flame. Holding the tinder nest with the ember nestled within, you would very gently begin to blow on it. Your breath needed to be slow, steady, and continuous, providing the ember with a consistent supply of oxygen without blowing it out. As you breathed, the ember would glow brighter, spreading through the dry tinder. You would see more smoke, then a subtle flicker, and finally, with a soft whoosh, the tinder nest would burst into a small flame. This moment was the culmination of significant physical effort and precise technique, a triumph born from raw friction. The hand drill, while simple in its lack of complex tools, was perhaps the most physically demanding and skill-intensive of the friction fire methods. It required not only specific wood types and a clear understanding of the process, but also immense patience, endurance, and practice. It was not a method for the faint of heart or those seeking a quick solution. Yet, in times and places where steel and flint were scarce or unavailable, or in situations where one needed to rely solely on what nature provided and what human hands could achieve, the hand drill stood as a testament to ingenuity and perseverance. It was a fundamental skill that connected medieval people directly to their most ancient ancestors, a direct expression of human will over elemental forces, learned through diligent effort and often through the blistered palms of dedicated practice. You have learned how people in the Middle Ages painstakingly coaxed fire into existence, transforming tiny sparks into sustained living flames through ingenuity and perseverance. But knowing how to make fire was only the beginning. Understanding its pervasive and absolute necessity in daily life reveals a deeper, more profound truth about that era. Fire was not a mere convenience, a flick of a switch, or the simple strike of a match, as it is for us today. It was, instead, the very foundation upon which medieval society was built, an omnipresent vital force that shaped every conceivable aspect of existence, from the humblest peasant's smoky hut to the grandest lord's imposing castle. Its absence meant not merely discomfort or inconvenience, but often the swift onset of hardship, debilitating illness, or even, inevitably, death. Consider first the most fundamental and immediate need, cooking. Without fire, there was simply no cooked food, a stark reality profoundly different from anything we experience in our modern world. Bread, for instance, the undisputed staple of the medieval diet across all social strata, from the poorest serf to the wealthiest noble, required substantial, often large, ovens heated by meticulously tended wood fires, frequently started with the very methods we have discussed, flint and steel, or the laborious bow drill. Imagine the communal village ovens, typically shared amongst families, where villagers would bring their carefully prepared dough to be baked, relying entirely on the sustained, intense heat of a carefully maintained blaze. Beyond bread, the daily nourishment of medieval people, hearty stews bubbling gently in large iron cauldrons suspended over flames, thick porridges simmering slowly, and succulent meats roasting on spits turned by hand, all depended critically on the steady, reliable heat of a central hearth. The fireplace in a medieval home was far more than just a decorative feature. It was the sole, indispensable engine for all food preparation, radiating essential warmth and flickering light into the living space. The characteristic smoky air, the comforting rhythmic crackling sounds of burning wood, and the pervasive, life-giving warmth permeating the entire room. These were the constant, undeniable sensory realities of everyday cooking and domestic life. Furthermore, food preservation, a critical and constant challenge in an era entirely devoid of refrigeration, relied heavily on the transformative power of fire. Meats and fish were carefully smoked for days or even weeks to prevent spoilage, their flavors deeply infused and altered by the aromatic wood smoke, allowing them to be stored for long periods. Boiling water, a simple act for us, was made safe for drinking by the intense heat of the flame, a crucial public health practice that helped significantly in preventing the rampant spread of waterborne diseases, especially in crowded, less sanitary settlements. The very act of eating and surviving, therefore, was inextricably linked to the ability to make and diligently maintain a fire. Beyond sustenance, fire was the primary, and often the only, defense against the relentless biting cold. Medieval winters were frequently and notoriously harsh, often marked by prolonged periods of freezing temperatures, heavy snowfall, and pervasive dampness. Conditions far more severe and unforgiving than what many might experience in contemporary times. Medieval homes, typically constructed from timber, wattle, and daub, or uninsulated thick stone, offered very little natural protection from the penetrating elements without an active heat source. A roaring, robust fire in the hearth was the sole reliable source of warmth, preventing the dreaded onset of frostbite, the dangerous progression of hypothermia, and the accompanying respiratory illnesses, all of which were particularly threatening to the elderly, the infirm, and the very young. Families would instinctively huddle closely around its comforting orange glow, sharing its precious life-saving heat, seeking refuge from the biting winds and persistent damp air that relentlessly seeped through every crack and crevice in their humble dwellings. In more opulent castles, grand cavernous fireplaces in sprawling great halls, and smaller, though still significant, ones in private chambers provided some measure of respite, though the pervasive, bone-chilling cold of the thick stone walls often remained a constant, unwelcome companion. The communal fire was more than just a heat source. It was a vital gathering point, a social hub where stories were shared, quiet contemplation found its space, and where people simply endured and survived the long, dark, and often perilous nights. Even during warmer months, a smaller fire was often diligently kept lit, if only to cook, to boil water for washing, or to dry damp clothes and bedding, preventing mildew and maintaining a basic level of hygiene and comfort. Light, in an age that existed entirely before the advent of electricity, was another indispensable and transformative gift of fire. Once the sun dipped below the horizon, the world outside was plunged into absolute, impenetrable darkness, a profound and overwhelming blackness far more complete than anything we typically encounter in our artificially illuminated modern lives. Torches, ingeniously fashioned from resinous wood or tightly bound bundles of reeds dipped in pitch or animal fat, illuminated pathways, vast castle corridors, and the dim, echoing interiors of churches and cathedrals, casting dancing, eerie shadows. Candles, while often expensive and thus frequently reserved for the wealthy elite, for solemn religious ceremonies, or for scholarly pursuits by monks and scribes, also depended entirely on a sustained, carefully protected flame. Simpler, more common sources included humble rushlights, dried rushes, often from wetlands, carefully dipped in rendered animal fat, which provided a dim, flickering glow sufficient for basic, close-up tasks. Lanterns, with their small enclosed flames protected by horn or thin metal, offered portable light, essential for navigating treacherous paths outside or moving between rooms after dark. Without these fire-based sources, travel became perilous, fraught with unseen dangers and productive work. Whether spinning wool, weaving cloth, or repairing tools, became utterly impossible once daylight faded. A single flame, whether from a hearth, a candle, or a humble rushlight, was a beacon against the overwhelming blackness, providing not just vital visibility, but also a profound psychological sense of security and companionship against the unseen. The dancing, ever-shifting, flickering shadows it cast became an inherent, constant part of the domestic landscape, a comforting, living presence that defined the very boundaries of the illuminated, safe world. Protection was yet another vital and multifaceted role fire played in medieval life. The radiant glow and intense heat of a well-tended fire effectively deterred wild animals, keeping dangerous predators such as wolves, bears, wild boars, and other threats away from vulnerable human settlements, vital livestock enclosures, and isolated farmsteads, especially during the long, vulnerable hours of night. Travelers and merchants camping in the vast, untamed wilderness would invariably build large, robust fires, not just for essential warmth and cooking, but as a crucial psychological and physical barrier against the manifold dangers lurking within the depths of the forest. The distinct, crackling sound of burning flames and the acrid, unmistakable smell of wood smoke were unmistakable signals to any creature lurking in the shadows that this territory was occupied by humans and that extreme caution was advised. This protective aspect extended even to the realm of human conflict and medieval warfare. During protracted sieges, clever defenders could set ablaze enemy siege engines, such as trebuchets or siege towers, with flaming arrows, or use fire to ignite and collapse vulnerable wooden fortifications. Signal fires, strategically lit on distant watchtowers, prominent hilltops, or along coastlines, served as rapid, long-distance warnings of approaching enemies, coordinating defenses and troop movements across vast territories. Fire was thus both an invaluable tool of passive defense and a potent, destructive weapon of war, capable of altering the course of a battle. Furthermore, fire was utterly indispensable for a vast array of medieval crafts and burgeoning industries, acting as the primary transformative agent that allowed raw, often unyielding materials to be shaped into useful, functional objects. Blacksmiths, for instance, relied entirely on intensely hot fires within their specialized forges to heat iron until it became incandescent, glowing orange or white, and malleable enough to be hammered, twisted, and skillfully shaped into essential tools for farming and daily life, durable weapons for defense, and protective armor for knights and soldiers. The rhythmic, powerful clanging sound of hammer on anvil, the sharp, satisfying hiss of quenching hot metal in water, and the distinct, metallic smell of hot iron were all inseparable from the roaring, consuming forge fire, which was meticulously controlled by bellows. Potters used specialized kilns, essentially large, enclosed ovens, heated by meticulously controlled fires, to bake raw, unfired clay into durable pottery for storage and cooking, sturdy roof tiles for buildings, and intricate decorative ceramic items. Glass makers, too, needed extreme sustained heat to melt sand, soda, and lime into molten glass, which could then be blown or molded into practical windows for homes and churches, useful bottles and containers, and intricate decorative items. Even seemingly simpler, everyday crafts, like dyeing fabrics, often involved boiling large vats of water over a fire to extract pigments from plants and minerals, and to permanently set the vibrant colors into the woven cloth. The very infrastructure and material culture of medieval life, from everyday farming implements and household goods to sophisticated building materials and intricate works of art, owed its very existence and continuous development to the controlled, transformative power of fire. Metallurgy, the complex science and intricate art of extracting and working with metals in particular, was utterly dependent on fire, and indeed, it was fire that drove many of its most significant innovations. From the earliest, often rudimentary stages of mining ores, which sometimes involved a clever technique called fire setting, where rock faces deep within mines were heated with intense fires and then rapidly cooled with water, causing them to crack and fracture, making extraction far easier, to the crucial and complex process of smelting raw ore into usable metal. Intense, sustained heat was paramount. Furnaces, often large and complex structures, fueled by vast quantities of charcoal, which itself was a product of carefully controlled slow burning of wood in low-oxygen environments, a specialized trade, were meticulously engineered to reach temperatures high enough to separate valuable metals like iron, copper, tin, and led from their raw, stony states. Without this fundamental ability to generate and precisely maintain high temperatures, the efficient production of essential metals for tools, weapons, coinage, and countless other applications would have been utterly impossible, severely limiting technological advancement. The gradual development of more advanced metalworking techniques, leading to stronger alloys, more efficient tool production, and ultimately greater societal wealth, directly corresponded with improved methods of generating, containing, and precisely controlling high temperatures in a forge or furnace. Beyond these tangible, practical applications, fire held profound symbolic, cultural, and even spiritual significance for medieval people. It was a central, revered element in numerous religious rituals, from the fragrant burning of incense during Mass to the carefully tended eternal flame in churches and monasteries, representing divine presence, spiritual purification, and unwavering faith. The hearth, glowing warmly at the very heart of every home, transcended its mere functional purpose to become a powerful, enduring symbol of family, safety, comfort, and vital community. In a world that could often be harsh, unforgiving, and fraught with danger, it provided a natural magnetic focal point for social gatherings, for the sharing of stories and news, and for the crucial transmission of oral traditions from one generation to the next. The very ability to make and control fire was not just a practical, learned skill, it was a profound testament to human ingenuity, resilience, and humanity's growing mastery over the primal, untamed forces of nature. It connected people directly to their distant ancestors, who had first harnessed this incredible, world-changing power millennia ago, and continued to be passed down through generations as a fundamental, non-negotiable survival technique, ensuring the continuity of human life, culture, and progress. Thus, fire was not merely a tool, it was a partner in survival, a silent yet powerful architect of medieval civilization itself. Its constant, indispensable presence dictated the very patterns of daily life, from the timing and meticulous preparation of meals to the design and construction of homes, workshops, and communal spaces. Every villager, every traveler, every craftsman, every soldier understood, often instinctively and profoundly, the multifaceted and absolute importance of a steady, reliable flame. It was the original energy source, powering not just their bodies through cooked food and their homes with warmth, but their entire way of life, illuminating their darkest nights, shielding them from the elements, and enabling the creation of almost everything they needed to survive, build, and ultimately to thrive. The very rhythm of medieval existence pulsed with the comforting, vital beat of the burning hearth, a constant, flickering testament to human adaptation, perseverance, and the enduring power of ingenuity. As you have learned, fire was not merely a convenience, it was the very pulse of medieval life, essential for survival, sustenance, and the continuation of daily existence in a world far removed from our modern comforts. But sustaining that pulse, day in and day out, required more than just desire. It demanded a mastery of ancient skills, a constant vigilance, and an enduring ingenuity that truly defined the age. The ability to conjure warmth and light from raw materials was not a niche craft, but a fundamental competency, deeply ingrained in the fabric of every household, from the humblest peasant cottage to the grandest castle hall. Consider, if you will, the profound difference this made to daily routines. There was no casual flick of a lighter, no simple push of a button. Each morning, or whenever a fire had died down to cold ashes, the process had to begin anew, or be carefully rekindled from a banked ember. This meant that the skill of fire-making was not an optional pursuit, but a vital part of education, passed down from parent to child, often from a very young age. You would learn to identify the best flint, to recognize the right type of steel that would throw a strong spark, and crucially, to prepare the tinder. This knowledge was practical, tactile, and absolutely non-negotiable for survival. Imagine a child, perhaps no older than 5 or 6, being taught to carefully gather dry leaves, to recognize the delicate papery bark of a birch tree, or to prepare the char cloth, understanding that their future comfort, warmth, and even their ability to eat depended on mastering these seemingly simple tasks. It fostered a deep connection to the natural world and its resources, a constant awareness of materials and their properties. The tinderbox, that unassuming container, became a symbol of preparedness and self-reliance. It was not just a collection of tools. It was a promise against the cold, a defense against the dark. If you were a traveler, a merchant, a soldier, or even just a farmer working in a distant field, your tinderbox was as essential as your tools, your food, or your water. To lose it, or to find its contents damp and useless, could mean a night of shivering cold, vulnerability to wild animals, or the inability to cook a meal. This constant need bred a profound resourcefulness. People became adept at improvising, using dried birds' nests, frayed ropes, or even carefully singed cloth if char cloth was unavailable. Every bit of dry, fibrous material was potentially valuable, viewed through the lens of its combustibility. This habit of careful observation and utilization of resources permeated all aspects of life. Furthermore, the very act of making fire shaped social interactions. In a village, if one household's fire went out, it was common practice to borrow an ember from a neighbor, carried carefully in a lidded pot or a fire pan. This daily ritual of sharing fire reinforced community bonds, a quiet acknowledgement of mutual dependence. The hearth, the central fireplace in every home, was more than just a source of heat. It was the heart of the home, a place of gathering, storytelling, and security. Its constant glow was a beacon against the long, dark nights, and its warmth a comfort against the biting cold of winter. The very architecture of medieval homes, with their large central hearths and chimneys, was a direct reflection of fire's central role. Beyond the domestic sphere, the mastery of fire was fundamental to medieval industry and craft. Without reliable fire, there would be no blacksmiths forging tools and weapons, no potters firing clay into durable vessels, no glass blowers shaping intricate objects, no bakers creating bread. Every trade, every innovation, every step forward in material culture relied on the consistent and controlled application of heat. Imagine the skill of a blacksmith, who not only needed to start his forge fire, but to maintain it at precise temperatures, knowing by the color of the flames or the glow of the coals exactly when the iron was ready to be worked. This was a mastery born of daily practice, of understanding the nuances of fuel and airflow, of knowing how to coax the most intense heat from simple wood and charcoal. The ingenuity required to sustain this constant need for fire extended to the very landscape. Forests were managed for timber and firewood, and specific areas might be cultivated for plants whose dried fibers or fungi made excellent tinder. The availability of good flint and steel could even influence trade routes and settlement patterns. A place with readily available resources for fire starting would have a distinct advantage, a hidden wealth that was perhaps more valuable than gold in the daily grind of survival. The need for fire dictated the rhythms of life, from the early morning task of rekindling the hearth to the evening ritual of banking the coals to preserve embers for the next day. In essence, the absence of modern matches and lighters in the Middle Ages did not limit human progress. Rather, it forged a profound and enduring ingenuity. It compelled people to understand their environment intimately, to develop remarkable manual dexterity, and to cultivate a deep patience in the face of a fundamental challenge. It was a time when the ability to create and control fire was not a scientific marvel, but a lived reality, a constant affirmation of human resourcefulness. This skill, honed over centuries, is a testament to the adaptability and perseverance of our ancestors, reminding us that even in the face of seemingly insurmountable obstacles, humanity finds a way to kindle warmth, to shed light, and to build a life. And as you drift deeper into rest, perhaps you can appreciate the quiet hum of that ancient ingenuity, a skill that truly lit up the medieval world.